The NHL entry draft. June 11, 1980, the Montreal Forum. The Montreal Canadiens have first pick overall and step up to the podium and announce, the Montreal Canadiens are proud to select Wayne Gretzky. Imagine. It almost happened. Here's how.
Hey everybody, I'm Rick. Welcome to Talkin' Habs, where you get your daily fix of Bleu Blanc Rouge.
Stay right there. So there's a story that just came out on Wednesday. There's actually two of them. One was by Frank Saravalli, and one, the author, I don't know who it was, but it's a really good story, and it gives kind of more in-depth about what happened. And that is that, like the title says, Wayne Gretzky almost a Hab. So the story revolves around legendary Habs GM Sam Pollock and his attempt to land Wayne Gretzky. And he made a deal like 4 years before he expected Wayne Gretzky to be in the draft in order to acquire a first-round pick, which would turn out hopefully to be the first overall pick in his estimation. And he turned out to be right. And there were complications. And it didn't turn out that Wayne Gretzky was in the draft. So I have this story. I'm going to give you all the details about it. And we're going to start with, why did this not ever come out in 41 years that, I had never heard about it myself as a Habs fan. And I had never heard anybody else talking about it. And the reason is this, that it may or may not be true. Sam Pollock was kind of made decisions. I don't know, put it this way. He kind of made plans for the things he wanted to do, and he didn't necessarily tell anybody about it. And that included the people that worked under him. And we have evidence of this, and this comes from the Saravalli story. And a former scout from Montreal, Doug Robinson, now retired after serving 30 years from 72 to 2002 as Montreal's chief scout, said Pollock played his cards close to the vest, even keeping his own scouting staff in the dark. I can't say I remember the thought of Gretzky being part of the deal or that kind of conversation, but nothing would surprise me. We were regularly talking about players 1 or 2 years out from their draft class. Pollock never said a word to anyone, even me. He didn't believe in it. He would simply say, tell me what you see. Can he play on our team ahead of this guy or this guy? And then you'd say yes or no. And he'd say thank you, and that was it. He'd move on and make his moves. He always knew who he wanted. He went on to say, Sam was always building. He constantly had a list of players' ages and had an idea on the optimum time to move a guy. He would trade established NHL players that would help teams immediately for future picks to keep his war chest stocked. Maybe it was a year earlier than you might have thought to trade a guy from your roster, but there was a plan behind it. And the evidence of that is just in the Guy Lafleur acquisition, how they got the pick to get Guy Lafleur. He acquired the pick from the Oakland Golden Seals or the California Golden Seals at the time. I don't know. And it would be the Oakland Seals, not Golden Seals. So he acquired a pick for the 71 draft. He figuring that Guy Lafleur was the guy he wanted, and that was his way to get it. And then to make that happen, he traded a defenseman, I believe it was Ralph Backstrom, to the LA Kings in order to keep the Kings ahead of the Seals in the standings and allow the Seals to finish last and give the Canadiens the pick that he had acquired. So this isn't the first time he had done something crafty like that. And you got to figure he saw an opportunity to basically make the same kind of a move and brilliance, genius on his part. And I believe that he did make this. And, he never revealed his plans to anyone, scouts, coaches, confidants, but it's how he worked. He planned things out, and it's an easy assumption, I think, to make. And I believe that this is an accurate assumption, that this is what he was trying to do. It's too bad Pollock passed away in 2007. So considering he never told anybody about it, there's absolutely no way that we'll ever know for sure 100%. But like I said, I believe this assumption, and I think it's an accurate one. Subscribe and ring that notifications bell. And hey, give a thumbs up.
Now, the draft eligibility
in 1980 had changed. It actually had changed in 1979. Previous to that, a player had to be 20 years old. So they didn't draft players under 20 years old. And they changed that to 19 in 1979 and dropped it to 18 in 1980. Now, Wayne Gretzky in 1980 would have been 19. You just had to be 19 because it was 19 or 20 before that, before 79. You just had to reach that age during the season. Players could be, say, 19, but they turned 20 during the season, so they were able to be drafted and able to play. Now, how did Gretzky do that? Because look, Gretzky turned 19 in 1980. He started his career in 1979-80 season, so it was the year before, and he was 18. So how did that happen? I've got the explanation here, and we're going to get right into it. Here is the draft eligibility for 1980. Junior age players became eligible for the draft once they graduate from junior hockey or to be signed as a free agent in the year the player reaches his 20th birthday. In 1979, the rules were changed, allowing players who had previously played professionally to be drafted. This rule change was made to facilitate the absorption of players from the defunct World Hockey Association. Consequently, the name of the draft was changed from NHL Amateur Draft to NHL Entry Draft beginning in 1980. Any player who is between the ages of 18 and 20 is eligible to be drafted. In addition, any non-North American player over the age of 20 can be selected. So it meant big changes. Previous to 1980, you could not have played professionally at all. And it would have been the reason why Wayne Gretzky wouldn't have qualified in 1979 to be drafted. He didn't have to. We'll get to that in a second, but he wouldn't have been because he had played professionally in the WHA already. As a matter of fact, his teammate Mark Messier was in the same boat, and we're going to explain how they got out of it. So the rule changes that happened not only dropped the ages from 20 to 19 and then to 18, but when it dropped in 1980 to 18, it changed the whole meaning of the draft because previously it was strictly an amateur draft. You could not have played professionally, but in 1980, they were allowing it. So in 1980, they were allowing players who had played professionally, hadn't been drafted, and you also had to be 18 by a certain date. So you had to be 18 by September 15th, or you had to wait the next year. And I'm going to explain the reason for that in the next little bit. So here's the second article, and it's a little bit more detailed. Sam Pollock made a brilliant trade with Colorado on September 13th, 1976. That's how far back it went. He was expecting to see Gretzky in the draft in 1980, and 4 years previously, he made this move to try to be able to get Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky was 15 years old at the time, and Pollock saw him as a future franchise player. He was playing with the Seneca Nationals, I think. So he arranged a trade with the Colorado Rockies, sending prospects Ron Andruff and Sean Shanahan for the option of exchanging first-round picks with Colorado in 1980. So it's very important, exchanging first-round picks, because that's the key. It was a nothing trade. They would have the option to exchange draft picks, first-round picks in 1980. Also, there was cash involved. So Colorado paid Montreal some cash for these players and this. Pollock wanted the top pick in 1980, gambling that Gretzky would be draft eligible at age 18. And you have to remember, at that time, it was 20. He had knowledge, and there was a reason for it. And that Colorado would be the last place team that year. And he won that gamble when the Rockies finished in last place in 1980, earning them the number one pick in the annual amateur draft. And it was on the last day in the 79-80 season that happened, that they became the last place team and finished that way. Just a brilliant, genius vision. He was a visionary, Pollock. He knew what was going to happen. How he did, I don't know. At the time of the trade, amateur players became NHL draft eligible at age 20, but the legal landscape of the NHL draft was changing. There were lawsuits brewing involving amateur players like John Tonelli and Ken Linsman, which would challenge the NHL draft eligible age, which was eventually lowered to 18. Sam Pollock was so ingrained into the NHL league office that he had actually written the rules for the 67 expansion draft. It's unthinkable that he would not have known about the changes imminent in draft age eligibility. He gambled that Gretzky would be draft eligible at age 18 in 1980. Gretzky was 19 in 1980, but he wouldn't have been eligible the year before. So he would have only been eligible in the draft when he was 19, even though the age had dropped to 18. So it's a confusing thing. It's confusing because he was 19 in 1980, not 18, but the rule needed to drop to 18 for him to be eligible then. His cost was negligible. Andruff and Shanahan were AHL players who didn't fit into Montreal's plans. Gretzky, born January 26, 1961, along with Mark Messier, born January 18, 1961, became draft eligible in 1979, but not by birth date. Special rules were created to facilitate the transfer of former WHA players into the NHL. Amateur players born before January 1st, 61 were eligible along with any younger player who played in the WHA in 1978-79. Gretzky and Messier were among these younger players. Since these younger and ex-WHA players were professionals, their eligibility wording excluded the word amateur. This is why the 1979 draft was renamed the entry draft, where previously it had been the amateur draft, because these young players were professional players, not amateurs. The league struggled with the question of underage eligibility. A debate over this topic, plus the busy agenda for the 79 June meetings, forced the league to postpone the draft from the weekend of June 10th, 1979 until August 9th, 1979. This gave the NHL an extra 2 months to settle the eligibility issue, which would require the blessing of the NHLPA as well as the key players in major junior hockey. The league also faced legal pressure from agent Art Kaminsky, who insisted that his client Tom McCarthy be eligible for the draft or he would sue the NHL. McCarthy was not due to turn 19 until the end of July, so by waiting until August, the NHL was able to draft him as a 19-year-old rather than an 18-year-old. But drafting in August also meant that the NHL would be holding the latest draft in its history, another record that is all but certain to stand the test of time. Finally, the issue was settled when the league agreed to allow the drafting of 19-year-olds in 1979, with a promise to widen the pool to include 18-year-olds in 1980. So Pollock's vision was validated as he held the rights to select the first player 1980 draft, which for the first time would include 18-year-olds. We want you to become a member of Talking Habs. But Gretzky slipped through his grasp for reasons beyond the control of the NHL and its draft rules. Regardless of NHL draft rules, we live in a society governed by the rule of law, which is a higher authority than the NHL. Gretzky had signed a personal services contract with Peter Pocklington, the owner of the WHA Edmonton Oilers, not a standard WHA players contract, which would terminate when the league ceased to exist. He owed his performance to Pocklington alone, and only the Oilers owner could release him from the contract. This is what kept Gretzky out of the draft. He didn't have a standard contract. The contract didn't get null and voided when the league ceased to exist, and then he would have gone into the draft. But because it was a personal services contract, he was able to stay working for Pocklington. Pocklington owned the Edmonton Oilers and might have been a reason why. I think he goes on to say that it was a reason why it ensured that the Edmonton Oilers would be part of the expansion. So as a result, no NHL team could claim a legal right to employ him. This was a clever tactic by Pocklington to ensure that he and his Oilers would be a part of the NHL in the post-WHA expansion. It was for this reason alone that Gretzky was never drafted by an NHL team, even though the eligibility rules for the 1979 entry draft were crafted specifically to include players with his unique circumstances. As such, Gretzky was ruled exempt from the NHL's 1979 entry draft, and the Oilers were allowed to retain his rights. I think that because Sam Pollock retired in the summer of 1979, and I'm going to make another assumption here and assume that once he knew that he couldn't get Gretzky, that work that he tried to do, and everything did seem to be paying off and it was going to work out, although he didn't know 100% that he would get that first pick yet. I think that's the reason he retired, once he knew that he wasn't going to get Gretzky and it was all said and done. So, yeah, I wonder if that's it. Because, I have to think, if Gretzky was a Montreal Canadian, yeah, and the article mentions this, that probably Pollock would have stuck around, Scotty Bowman would have stuck around, Ken Dryden probably would have stuck around, Guy Lafleur wouldn't have retired if probably in 1984. These are things that would have happened to change the landscape here in Montreal going forward, and the history since then, and the fact that we have only won 2 cups since then. So, yeah, it could have been a huge difference. In 1980, Montreal drafted Doug Wickenheiser with the first pick, bypassing French-Canadian Denis Savard. And should have drafted Denis Savard. That was a mistake. By then, Pollock had left the Canadiens organization. So it was Irving Grundman who made that decision. So that shouldn't surprise anybody then. Messier was drafted in the 3rd round, 48th overall, by the Oilers in the 1979 NHL entry draft. Because he didn't have a personal services contract, and the team that he was with, the Cincinnati Stingers, had went defunct. They folded. So the NHL avoided a draft dilemma by allowing Edmonton to retain Gretzky's rights. But Messier had played for a defunct WHA team, the Cincinnati Stingers, and had to join a new one in the NHL, and therefore entered the league through the special entry draft rule as a player born after 1/1/61 who played in the WHA in 1978-79. So Pollock's brilliant vision and planning was thwarted by an unpredictable circumstance. But Gretzky came oh so close to joining the Canadiens for the 1980. Would Gretzky's arrival have compelled, here's where he talks about that, Coach Scotty Bowman to remain in Montreal rather than leave to join the Buffalo Sabres? Would Guy Lafleur have enjoyed a career revival with a center ice line mate wearing number 99? Would Ken Dryden hold off his retirement for a few more seasons? And we'll just never know. And it's amazing to think what could have happened, right? So here, in a nutshell, here's why Wayne Gretzky did not get drafted. So the Indianapolis Racers will live on in hockey history for one reason. They signed a skinny 17-year-old from Brantford, Ontario, named Wayne Gretzky in the summer of 1978. The NHL wouldn't touch players that young, but the WHA, then in its dying season, wasn't as fussy. Gretzky, a star in junior hockey, played just 8 games with the Racers before being sold to Edmonton and helping the Oilers make it to the last WHA final, which they lost. No NHL team owned Gretzky's rights because he had never been drafted because of his age. He didn't qualify at that point by the time the WHA teams came into the league. So Edmonton was able to keep him when the NHL absorbed 4 WHA teams in the summer of 1979, plus the fact that he had been signed to that personal services contract. So it's all very kind of convoluted, but that's why Wayne Gretzky is not a Montreal Canadian. And it's a shame. So here's Gretzky's reaction after hearing all about this. "Wow," said Gretzky. "I never heard that. It would have been an absolute thrill. Growing up a Maple Leafs fan, it might have been tough to switch my allegiance. But watching hockey every Saturday night, those were the 2 teams ingrained in your mind. They were an immaculate franchise, not only visible but successful." Even after he turned pro, Gretzky used to walk the concourse at the Forum, soaking in the surroundings. He said he remembered where every photo used to hang on each door near the dressing rooms. "I don't think I can even put into words what a thrill it would have been to play in a place like the Forum," Gretzky said. "It's fun to think about what it would have been, but I'm thrilled with the way things worked out." So there you go. That's how Wayne Gretzky almost became a Hab. If not for an unforeseen circumstance of, I think, the personal services contract, Wayne Gretzky might have been a Montreal Canadian. And that's it. I don't think I can add anything more to that. I don't know if any of that, what I just said, I don't know if any of that made any sense, and I hope I can freaking edit that into something that made sense. So, yeah, if I could remember. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hey, check out that video over there.